Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the sources you send us, really dig in, and try to pull out what's genuinely important, what actually matters. Today, we're going deep, right into the icy waters of history, actually. We're talking about the RMS Titanic. I mean, it's more than just a shipwreck, isn't it? It's become this huge cultural thing, something that still fascinates us, gosh, over a century later. A tragedy that's really stuck in our collective mind. You think about it, the biggest, most luxurious ship of its time sinks on its first voyage. Takes 1,500 people with it. It completely shattered that, Edwardian confidence in technology. Progress wasn't infallible after all. A massive shock. Left so many questions unanswered. And whenever you have these huge traumatic events, well, myths start to pop up. It's almost inevitable.
Oh, absolutely. It's like human nature trying to make sense of the unthinkable.
Exactly. Like with Titanic, you hear stories about, a cursed mummy in the hold?
Right.
Or even that a German U-boat sank it, which is, chronologically impossible, but still gets mentioned.
Right. The explanations people grasp for can be pretty wild.
But today, we're not just talking about any old rumor. We are tackling one of the most, I'd say, intricate, complex, and honestly just persistent conspiracy theories out there about the Titanic. It's the ship swap theory.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this. So the basic idea, the core claim, it's bold. It says the ship that hit the iceberg and sank, that wasn't the Titanic. It was supposedly its older sister ship, the RMS Olympic, damaged apparently, and switched out as part of this gigantic insurance fraud scheme.
It's quite a story.
It really is. So our mission today, using the sources you've provided, is to basically take this whole narrative apart piece by piece, forensically, separate the actual facts from what looks like some pretty elaborate fiction. We want to show you why this theory, even though it's surprisingly popular online, just doesn't hold water, why it's a logistical nightmare, financially backwards, and frankly, an engineering impossibility.
Yeah, get ready for some aha moments, I think. We're aiming to show not just what happened according to the historical record, but why this alternative story, this swap theory, gets traction and, crucially, where its fundamental flaws lie.
It's undeniable, isn't it? These huge traumatic events like the Titanic sinking, they just seem to breed myths, conspiracy theories.
It's a pattern, definitely. People search for explanations for agency, especially when something feels so random and devastating.
Yeah, it's like our brains aren't comfortable with just chaos or a massive, terrible accident born from a mix of factors. We look for a reason, a plot, a hidden hand, maybe.
Right. And this Titanic Olympic swap theory, it's been particularly sticky. It hangs around.
It really does. And I think part of its staying power is its complexity. It's not simple. It presents this really intricate story, sometimes wrapped up in what looks like scholarly research, gives it this kind of deceptive shine of credibility.
It mimics the form of research, even if the substance isn't there.
Exactly. And that taps into something deeper, I think. This desire people have for a hidden history, the idea that there's a secret story the experts miss, or maybe they're even covering up.
The real story.
The real story, exactly. And what makes this one so effective, maybe, is that it starts with a little bit of truth. There was an incident involving the Olympic, which we'll get into.
A crucial kernel, yeah.
Right. And from that kernel, the theory just spins this huge web. Misinterpreted facts, coincidences that are made to look like connections, sometimes just outright falsehoods, all woven together to create this alternative narrative that for some people just feels more compelling, maybe, more satisfying than the messy reality.
What's fascinating here is exactly that point. That perceived complexity, the intricate structure, it actually makes the theory feel more substantial to someone who hasn't, dug into the technical details. It feels like it must be true because it's so complicated.
Right, it takes effort to understand, so it feels like it must have weight.
Precisely. Which means just saying, oh, that's wrong, isn't enough. You really need to break it down step by step, look at it from multiple angles: finance, engineering, logistics, which is what we're trying to do today, using that detailed forensic approach based on your sources.
Okay.
Because these narratives, they're often quite clever in how they link things. They'll take event A, which happened, and event B, which also happened, and imply this direct causal link that just isn't supported by evidence. Or they twist event A to fit a conclusion they already decided on.
It's like building with mismatched bricks, hoping no one notices the gaps.
Yeah, or like you said, a house of cards. Looks impressive until you touch it.
Right. Okay, so before we start pulling out those cards, let's map out the structure. What is the theory actually claiming? How does it supposedly all fit together? Here's where it gets really interesting, laying out the actual story the theory tells.
Okay, so the bedrock, the absolute foundation of this whole thing is a real event.
Yeah.
No question about that. It's the collision between the RMS Olympic and a British Royal Navy cruiser, the HMS Hawke. This happened September 20th, 1911. So about 7 months before Titanic sailed.
Right, so there's a time gap.
A significant one, yeah. They were in the Solent, which is this busy, straight off the English coast. Narrow channel, strong currents. Olympic is huge, obviously unprecedented size for the time. As it's moving, the Hawke, a much smaller, faster ship, and crucially, it had this reinforced ram bow designed for naval warfare.
A Rambo, okay.
Yeah, designed to punch holes in enemy ships. Anyway, the Hawke was following the Olympic. The official story, backed by physics, is that the massive Olympic displaced so much water, it created this powerful suction, hydrodynamics.
Like pulling the smaller ship in.
Exactly. It reportedly just sucked the Hawke right into the Olympic starboard side. The Hawke's ram bow hit hard, tore 2 big gashes in the Olympic's hull, one above the waterline, one below.
Below the waterline, that sounds serious.
It was. It flooded 2 watertight compartments, damaged the propeller shaft. The Olympic was definitely hurt.
Okay, so a real collision, real damage. Where does the conspiracy come in?
Right here. This is the linchpin. The naval inquiry that followed. It blamed the Olympic, found White Star Line at fault, and that had massive financial consequences. Suddenly, White Star is on the hook not just for repairing their own brand new flagship, the Olympic, but also for repairing the Navy's ship, the Hawke.
Double hit.
And the killer blow, financially speaking. Because they were found at fault, they couldn't claim the damage to the Olympic on their insurance.
Ouch. No insurance payout for their own ship's damage.
None. So the theorists argue this created genuine, massive financial pressure. Their flagship's out of action, earning nothing and costing them a fortune in repairs for both ships. This is presented as the core motive for everything that supposedly follows.
Okay, so the theory starts with that financial hole. White Star is desperate. What's the next step in their logic?
The theory then makes this huge leap. It claims the damage to the Olympic wasn't just bad, it was catastrophic. Far worse than admitted. That the collision actually bent the ship's keel, its structural spine.
Bent the keel. That sounds terminal for a ship.
It would be, yeah. Rendering it basically unsound, maybe permanently listing to one side, and definitely unprofitable to operate long-term. Now, there's zero actual evidence for this bent keel claim. It's crucial to state. It's an assertion mainly from the theory's biggest promoter, a writer named Robin Gardner.
Okay, so Gardner claims the Olympic is basically a write-off. Uninsurable, irreparable.
Exactly. And faced with this alleged financial ruin, the theory says the top brass at White Star Line, specifically pointing fingers at the owner, the big American financier J.P. Morgan, and the company chairman, J. Bruce Ismay, they hatched this incredibly audacious, almost unbelievable plan.
And this is the swap.
This is the swap. The alleged plan had several stages.
Yeah.
First, the switch itself. Well, the damaged Olympic is back in Belfast at the Harland and Wolff shipyard for repairs. And crucially, the Titanic is right there too, nearly finished. They secretly swapped their identities.
How? Like literally swap nameplates.
Nameplates, yes. But also things like the ship's bell, the life preservers, maybe even stationery, logbooks, anything with the name on it. Disguised the damaged Olympic to look exactly like the brand new Titanic.
Wow, okay. Stage 2.
Stage 2, the thinking. The damaged Olympic, now sailing as the Titanic, sets off on its maiden voyage. The original plan, according to the theory, wasn't the iceberg disaster. It was supposed to be a minor, controlled incident.
Like what? A small fire, a staged leak?
Something like that, yeah. Something to make the ship sink slowly, predictably. Enough time for another ship, maybe the real Titanic sailing nearby as the Olympic, or just another vessel waiting in the right spot to rescue everyone. No casualties, a bloodless fraud.
So the iceberg collision in this theory was bad luck, an accident within the plan.
Exactly, an unforeseen catastrophe that turned their supposedly controlled fraud into an absolute disaster with huge loss of life. That wasn't part of the alleged original scheme.
Okay, and the payoff. Stage 3.
Stage 3, the payout. With the ship they called Titanic but was really the damaged Olympic, now at the bottom of the Atlantic, White Star collects the full insurance value for a brand new ship.
Recouping the losses from the Hawke collision and maybe making a profit?
That's the idea. They get the insurance money they couldn't get for the Olympic's initial damage. And then, stage 4, the survivor. The actual undamaged Titanic, now disguised as the Olympic, just quietly takes over its sister ship's career, sails for years, makes money, and nobody ever knows the difference.
It's intricate. It really is a staggering narrative. Takes those few real events, the collision, the repairs, and twists them into this giant conspiracy.
It's incredibly elaborate. And then, often layered on top of that, you get this even darker subplot involving J.P. Morgan.
Right, the assassination angle.
Exactly. This version says the sinking wasn't just about insurance. It was deliberately engineered by Morgan to get rid of specific people. 3 very wealthy, very powerful men who happened to be on board. John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus.
And why would Morgan want them gone, according to this version?
The alleged motive here is political. The theory claims these 3 men were fierce opponents of Morgan's big project at the time, creating a U.S. central bank, what eventually became the Federal Reserve in 1913.
So they were obstacles to his financial plans.
That's the claim. And the main piece of evidence they point to for this plot is the fact that J.P. Morgan himself, he had a ticket. He was booked to sail on the Titanic's maiden voyage in one of the best suites.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, but he canceled right at the last minute.
Ah, so the theorists say he canceled because he knew. He knew it was going down.
Precisely. He saves himself while ensuring his powerful enemies go down with the ship. He transforms the whole thing from corporate greed into, cold-blooded murder on the high seas, political assassination.
That definitely adds a layer of drama, makes it more sinister.
It does. And probably more compelling for some people. Yeah. It provides this really strong, emotionally charged explanation. And again, what's fascinating here is how cleverly it weaves in real facts. Morgan did cancel. These men were on board and did die, but twists them into this narrative of intentional malice that isn't supported by any actual proof of motive or action.
It's a masterclass in constructing a conspiracy narrative, taking real dots and drawing completely fictional lines between them.
Exactly. It's designed to sound plausible if you don't scrutinize the connections too closely.
Okay, it's definitely a compelling story. You can see why it grabs people. Powerful figures, secrets, a hidden truth. It ticks a lot of boxes. But now, let's shift gears. Let's get into the numbers. The cold, hard cash aspect. We've heard the story. The alleged motive is insurance fraud, driven by desperation after the Hawk collision. Does that actually stand up when you look at the financials?
This is where the theory really starts to unravel quickly.
So what does this all mean for the supposed insurance motive?
It means the motive completely collapses. I mean, utterly. It's not just weak. It's actively contradicted by the financial facts. It's maybe the biggest, most straightforward hole in the entire theory.
Okay. So what's the problem?
Well, think about it. If you're going to pull off a massive fraud like this, you'd want to make money, right? Or at least, cut your losses significantly. Maximize the payout, minimize the risk.
Makes sense.
The financial reality around Titanic shows the absolute opposite. The single most glaring flaw is just basic arithmetic. Construction cost versus insurance value. This is a huge aha moment.
Okay, lay it on us. What were the numbers?
Right. Building the Titanic cost roughly $7.5 million back in 1912. That's about £1.5 million sterling. A colossal sum.
Okay, and the insurance?
The insurance coverage on the ship's hull and machinery, only $5 million, or £1 million sterling.
Wait, so they built it for $7.5 million, but only insured it for $5 million?
Exactly. They deliberately underinsured their brand new flagship by $2.5 million, a full third of its construction cost.
That seems backwards. Why would you do that?
Well, a confident owner might do it, believing the risk was low and wanting to save on premium costs. But someone planning to sink the ship for insurance, it makes zero sense. Sinking the Titanic would guarantee White Star Line a massive, immediate, irrecoverable loss of $2.5 million just on the hull itself, before anything else.
Wow. So the fraud would actually cost them millions right off the bat.
Precisely. It completely destroys the financial motive. Like maritime historian J. Kent Layton said, and it's worth quoting, "The switch conspiracy founders quite literally on its financial merits alone."
That's pretty definitive. Underinsuring your prize asset is the last thing you'd do if you plan to destroy it for the payout.
It signals confidence, not conspiracy. It's completely illogical from a fraud perspective.
Okay, that's a massive hole. What about the insurance policy itself? Any clues there?
Oh yeah, the policy details make it even worse for the theory. Another aha moment, really. The insurance was placed through a top broker, Willis Faber & Co., onto the Lloyd's of London market, the absolute pinnacle of marine insurance.
Okay, standard practice for a big ship.
Right. But the premium they paid for that £1 million coverage, which was so huge it had to be spread across many different insurers or syndicates at Lloyd's, was incredibly low. Just £7,500.
7,500 pounds on 1,000,000 pounds of coverage. That's what? Less than 1%.
Exactly. 175%. That is a remarkably low rate. Think about what that signifies.
It signifies confidence from the insurers.
Immense confidence. The underwriters at Lloyd's, who were the best in the world at assessing risk, clearly had huge faith in the ship's design, its construction at Harland and Wolff, and importantly, the safety record and reputation of the White Star Line itself.
Right. If White Star knew they were sending out a damaged ship, planning to sink it,
the risk would be astronomical. The premium would have been sky high. Or they'd have needed a whole other conspiracy to trick the underwriters at Lloyd's, which just adds another layer of impossibility the theory never addresses.
it just keeps getting more complicated and less plausible.
Exactly. And as historian Gareth Russell points out, if you were going to commit insurance fraud, there were much simpler, less risky ways, like staging a fire while the ship was docked. You wouldn't risk 1,500 lives, your entire company reputation, and guarantee a massive financial loss just to maybe solve a smaller financial problem. It's absurd from a business standpoint.
So the direct loss from underinsurance was just the start of the financial bleeding then?
Oh, absolutely. That $2.5 million loss was just the beginning. Think about the aftermath.
The lawsuit.
Huge lawsuits. Survivors, families of victims. They filed claims totaling over $16 million. Now, White Star did manage, through lengthy court battles in the U.S. and U.K., to limit their liability payout to about $664,000 based on maritime law at the time.
It's a lot of money, though, and the legal costs.
Exactly. Protracted, expensive legal fights that dragged on for years and were terrible for their public image. Add to that the liability for lost cargo, lost registered mail. That adds up on a ship like Titanic.
And the biggest loss, maybe?
The lost revenue. This is supposed to be their flagship, operating on the most profitable route in the world, the North Atlantic crossing, generating income for decades, gone instantly.
So when you add it all up, underinsurance, legal claims, lost cargo, lost future revenue, reputational damage.
The sinking was an unmitigated financial disaster for White Star Line. It didn't solve their Hawk collision problem. It dug them into an infinitely deeper hole.
Okay.
So if we connect this back to the bigger picture, the idea that this was some clever financial scheme, it makes absolutely zero sense. The financial evidence doesn't just weaken the motive, it destroys it, turns it completely upside down.
Right. The numbers just don't lie on this one. Okay, so the motive is gone. But the theory also rests heavily on this idea that Titanic and Olympic were basically identical, easy to swap. Let's dig into that. What does the physical evidence actually show?
This is another area where the theory just completely falls apart under scrutiny. The core premise that they were identical twin sisters is fundamentally wrong.
So they weren't identical.
Not at all.
Yeah.
I mean, they share the same basic design, yes. Same hull form, same engines, roughly the same size. But Titanic was built second. And like with any class of ships or cars or anything really, you learn lessons from the first one.
Right, you make improvements on the next one.
Exactly. White Star Line and Harland and Wolff incorporated numerous quite significant modifications into Titanic based directly on the Olympic's first few months of actual service. Real-world experience feeding back into the design.
And these weren't just like changing the carpet.
No. These were deep structural changes, things that altered the ship's appearance, its layout, even its legal tonnage. And these differences are incredibly well documented. Shipyard records, photos from the time, and crucially, evidence from the wreck itself.
Okay, so what's the most definitive evidence that the ship on the seabed is Titanic?
Well, the single most conclusive piece, the real forensic smoking gun, is the yard number.
The yard number.
Yeah. Every ship built at Harland and Wolff got a unique construction number, like a serial number. It was stamped, punched, carved onto countless parts all over the ship. Steel plates, propellers, engines, even wood paneling sometimes.
Right. So what were their numbers?
Olympic was yard number 400. Titanic was yard number 401.
Simple as that. 400 and 401.
Simple as that. And utterly irrefutable. Since the wreck was found in '85 by Robert Ballard, expeditions have recovered lots of artifacts from the debris field. Machinery parts, bits of hull plating, other components.
Right.
Every single piece positively identified as belonging to the wreck bears the number 401 consistently.
Wow.
And conversely, when the Olympic was scrapped way later, in 1935, a lot of her interior fittings were auctioned off. People still have them today. Guess what number is stamped on them?
400.
Yard number 400. But the absolute killer proof. There's a famous photo taken by Ballard's team of one of the massive bronze propellers lying half buried on the seabed.
Yeah.
And stamped right there, clear as day on the metal.
Let me guess. 401.
401. That single photograph is enough, really, to prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that the ship down there is the Titanic. Game over, you might say.
That does sound pretty conclusive. Hard to argue with a giant number stamped on the propeller.
It really is.
But you said there are other differences, too, beyond the yard number.
Oh, loads. The yard number is just the nail in the coffin. The whole idea of evolutionary design explains these differences perfectly logically. Why would conspirators planning a secret swap make all these huge, expensive, time-consuming, and highly visible changes? It makes no sense for a fraud.
Right. They want them to be more identical, not less.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, let's run through a few key ones. The A-deck promenade deck. Big, long walkway near the top of the ship.
Okay.
On Olympic, it was completely open to the elements all the way along. Classic promenade deck. On Titanic, they enclosed the forward half of it, put up a steel screen with sliding glass windows.
Why?
Probably for passenger comfort, protection from wind and spray.
Well,
But the point is, it was a major visual difference. You could see it from miles away. And guess what the wreck shows?
the enclosed version.
It clearly shows Titanic's enclosed configuration, no question.
Yeah, well,
B deck, one level down. On Olympic, B deck had another promenade, a walkway wrapping around. First-class passengers could stroll there. On Titanic, they got rid of most of that promenade
got rid of it. Why?
to build bigger cabins. More lucrative first-class staterooms, including these two ultra-luxury parlor suites, which were unique to Titanic. They even had their own private promenades. And they added the Café Parisien there, too, another unique Titanic feature.
So they fundamentally changed the layout and the exterior look of B-Deck?
Absolutely. Inside and out. A major structural change, not just cosmetic. And this leads to another difference. The windows on B-Deck.
How so?
On Olympic, with that regular promenade, the windows along B-Deck were evenly spaced, all the same rectangular shape. Pretty standard. On Titanic, because they'd built those different size suites in the cafe, the windows became irregular. Different sizes, uneven spacing.
Reflecting the new rooms behind them.
Precisely. Another clear visual difference. And guess what the wreck shows?
Irregular windows matching Titanic's plans.
Exactly.
Well,
Matches Titanic's unique window pattern perfectly.
It's stacking up. Any others?
A few more quick ones. The bridge wings, those platforms sticking out from the side of the bridge. On Olympic, they were flush with the superstructure. On Titanic, they extended out slightly, just a bit. A minor change, but another difference, done for better visibility when docking.
Okay.
The center propeller. Olympic had a 4-bladed one. Titanic had a 3-bladed one. They were actually experimenting with propeller designs.
So even the engineering underneath was different.
Yep, and that actually leads to another legal difference, gross tonnage. That's the measure of a ship's internal volume, its size for registration and fees. Because Titanic had those enclosed spaces on A deck and the different B deck layout, she was legally slightly larger. 46,329 gross registered tons versus Olympic's 45,324.
So they weren't even legally the same size.
Nope. And even inside, the fittings. Olympic was luxury, sure, but Titanic took it up a notch. More elaborate details, more extensive wall-to-wall carpeting in places like the dining saloon where Olympic might have had linoleum. Swapping them would mean gutting and refitting huge parts of the interiors too. A massive job.
Wow. Okay, so these weren't just minor tweaks. These were significant, documented differences in structure, layout, engineering, even legal size.
Absolutely. And they all make perfect sense from a design and business perspective. We know, for example, that J. Bruce Ismay himself, the White Star chairman, was involved in the B-deck changes on Titanic.
How so?
After sailing on Olympic's maiden voyage, he noticed that B-deck promenade wasn't very popular. Passengers preferred A-deck. But there was huge demand for more private, super-luxury suites.
So he said, let's change Titanic.
Exactly. Let's ditch the less-used promenade on B-deck on the ship we haven't finished yet, build those bigger suites people want, add that trendy Café Parisien, and then we'll enclose part of A-deck to give back some sheltered walking space.
Yeah.
It was a logical business decision based on real-world feedback.
And it's documented.
Completely documented. Blueprints, memos, photos. It makes perfect commercial sense, which again raises that crucial question.
Why would conspirators doing a secret swap make all these expensive, time-consuming, highly visible, commercially sensible changes?
Precisely. It makes no sense whatsoever in the context of a fraud. The physical evidence doesn't just fail to support the swap, it actively contradicts it at every turn and supports the official history. The ship on the seabed looks like Titanic, is structurally Titanic, and has Titanic's number stamped on it. It is Titanic.
Okay, so the money doesn't work, the ships weren't identical, and the wreck proves it. It seems pretty comprehensive. But let's tackle the logistics. Even if you tried to ignore all that, could they actually do a swap, practically speaking?
This is where the theory hits, I think, its most insurmountable wall. Just the sheer practical impossibility of it all.
Right. I mean, try to picture it, secretly swapping these two enormous things, 46,000 tons each, the biggest moving objects humans had ever built at that point, and doing it in secret, in a busy shipyard.
It beggars belief, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Harland and Wolff in Belfast.
Mm.
It wasn't some secret underground bunker. It was the absolute heart of Belfast's industry, a massive source of civic pride. You had that giant aerial gantry structure towering over everything.
Visible for miles, presumably.
Absolutely dominated the skyline. Building these ships was a public spectacle. You could see them from nearby hills, from houses, from boats on the water. They were photographed constantly.
Not just official photos.
No way. Official photographers like Robert Welch, yes. But also the press, newspapers, hundreds of amateur photographers, tourists, visitors wandering around the yard. It wasn't locked down like Area 51.
So the idea that you could spend months, which it would have taken, doing major deconstruction and reconstruction on two separate, gigantic ships right out in the open, and no one notices, no photos leak, no eyewitnesses.
It's inconceivable. It truly is. You couldn't swap two double-decker buses secretly in that environment, let alone two ocean liners.
And then there's the people involved. This wasn't a two-man job.
Not even close. This is the human factor, and it's just as impossible. A conspiracy of this scale. You're talking thousands of people who would have had to be in on it. And keep silent.
Forever.
Who are we talking about?
Okay, deep breath. The entire top management of White Star Line. The entire top management of Harland and Wolff. Then, literally thousands of shipyard workers, the guys actually doing the work. Riveters, platers, carpenters, electricians, painters, engineers. They all knew these ships intimately. They built them.
They'd know instantly if they were working on the wrong ship or swapping major parts. Of course. And then you've got the hundreds of crew members who served on both ships over time. They live on these vessels. They'd notice if suddenly the layout changed or if their supposedly old ship felt brand new inside.
And the officials? Inspectors?
Yep, the Board of Trade Surveyors. These were experienced professionals whose job was to meticulously inspect every detail before certifying a ship as seaworthy. They'd have to be fooled or be part of the conspiracy too.
Thousands of people, from executives down to shipyard workers, mostly ordinary working-class Belfast guys.
Exactly. And the idea that you could pay off or intimidate thousands of these men into lifelong silence about a plot that directly led to the deaths of 1,500 people, many of them probably known in the community, it just defies everything we know about human nature, about guilt, gossip, deathbed confessions.
You'd expect something to come out. A letter, a diary, someone telling their grandkids.
In over 100 years, not one single credible piece of evidence has ever emerged from any supposed conspirator. Not one. That silence isn't proof of a perfect conspiracy. It's proof there was no conspiracy to keep quiet about. The human scale alone makes it utterly unbelievable.
Okay, impossible numbers of people. What about time? Did they even have the opportunity to do this swap? Were both ships in the yard together long enough?
Another critical point. The time frames just don't work. We know exactly when Olympic and Titanic were physically together in Belfast, and those periods are far too short for the massive work involved in a swap.
Right. When was the Olympic back for repairs after hitting the Hawk?
She came back in October 1911, and the repairs took over 6 weeks, into late November. Titanic was still being fitted out nearby then. Later, in March 1912, just before Titanic's maiden voyage, Olympic came back again just to replace a lost propeller blade. That took only a few days, March 2nd to March 7th.
So 6 weeks in late 1911, a few days in March 1912, that's it.
Those were the main periods they were together, and work was being done on Olympic. To think they could completely swap identities, including all those structural changes we talked about, gut and refit interiors, in that time frame, it's logistically absurd. It would take many, many months.
And there's a paradox here, too, isn't there, about the repairs themselves?
Yes. This is maybe the most direct contradiction. To get the Olympic repaired and back, earning money as quickly as possible after the Hawk collision, Harland and Wolff actually had to take parts from the Titanic, which was still under construction.
They cannibalized Titanic to fix Olympic.
Exactly, including a brand new propeller shaft. This actually delayed Titanic's completion and her maiden voyage.
Wait, think about that. If the plan was to disguise the damaged Olympic as Titanic and sink it, why would you take a crucial brand new part from the real Titanic to fix the ship you supposedly planned to sacrifice?
You wouldn't. It makes absolutely no sense. It's the exact opposite of what the conspiracy would require. It shows their priority was getting the Olympic back in service. Even if it meant delaying the ship, the theory claims was destined for the scrap heap anyway.
That single fact just devastates the theory, doesn't it?
Completely. The documented logistical reality is precisely counter to the conspiracy's needs. It shows the commercial imperative was to fix Olympic, not secretly prepare her for destruction as Titanic.
Okay, so the core theory is just shattered. Motive gone, physical evidence contradicts it, logistics impossible, timeline wrong, the human element unbelievable.
Pretty much, yeah. It's dismantled from every angle.
But let's quickly address those other little arguments, the subplots that people sometimes bring up to try and keep it alive, like the J.P. Morgan assassination plot.
Right. The Federal Reserve subplot. It sounds dramatic, but it's built on sand. Pure fabrication.
How so? The claim is Astor, Guggenheim, and Strauss oppose the bank, right?
That's the claim. And it's demonstrably false. There's zero public record of Astor or Guggenheim ever taking any stance on the central bank issue at all. Their focus was elsewhere. And Isidore Strauss, the co-owner of Macy's, he actually spoken publicly in favor of the idea.
Seriously? He supported it?
Yes. So the entire motive for Morgan wanting them dead just evaporates. It's not just weak, it's non-existent. Made up.
Okay, so the why is gone. What about Morgan canceling his trip? Isn't that suspicious?
Not really when you look at the context. Lots of other prominent people canceled their Titanic tickets too. Milton Hershey, the chocolate guy, Alfred Vanderbilt. People canceled for all sorts of reasons. Illness, business, changing plans.
So Morgan wasn't unique.
Not at all. His official reason was illness. Some historians think he just wanted to extend his vacation in France with his mistress, or maybe deal with shipping some art treasures. It was a mundane cancellation that tragically coincided with the disaster. No conspiracy needed to explain it.
And you mentioned the Rothschilds sometimes get dragged into this?
Yet some versions swap Morgan for the Rothschilds as the masterminds,
Right.
which is
Right.
it's a really old, ugly, anti-Semitic trope,
Mm-hmm.
blaming powerful Jewish financiers for disasters.
It
Pops up in conspiracy theories all the time, and it had zero basis, in fact, here, as usual.
Okay, disturbing. What about other minor points? People sometimes talk about portholes.
Yes, the porthole argument.
Yeah.
Theorists point to photos showing, say, 14 portholes on the forecastle deck during construction, and then maybe 16 on the ship when it sailed, and claim, different ship.
Mm-hmm.
But researchers like Steve Hall and Bruce Beveridge went through the plans. Both ships were designed with 14. Titanic simply had 2 extra ones added late in the fitting out stage, probably for better light or air in a cruise space.
Yeah.
It was a minor, documented, late-stage design tweak. Happens all the time in shipbuilding. It's not evidence of a swap.
Just normal construction process. And the claim Titanic was rushed to sea without inspection, to hide the switch.
Also completely false. Totally contradicts the record.
Right.
Titanic underwent extensive sea trials on April 2nd, 1912. Well documented. Ran speed tests, maneuverability tests, tested equipment. And she was thoroughly inspected by the Board of Trade officials. Multiple surveyors checked everything. Construction, machinery, safety gear. They issued the certificate saying she was seaworthy. It was a rigorous process, not some rushed secret launch.
So these arguments are just misinterpreting normal events.
Exactly. It's a classic conspiracy tactic. Take a perfectly normal, documented thing, a design change, a sea trial, someone changing travel plans, and twist it. Reinterpret it as proof of a cover-up without any actual evidence connecting the dots that way.
It seems like when you put the swap theory next to other debunked Titanic myths, like the mummy's curse or that no PP hull number thing.
It fits right in, doesn't it? It's revealed as just another piece of folklore. Another attempt to find a more dramatic or perhaps more controllable narrative than the complex, tragic reality.
So let's try and wrap this all up. We've gone through the theory, the alleged motives, the evidence, or lack thereof.
Yeah.
The weight of evidence against this Titanic Olympic swap idea isn't just like substantial. It seems overwhelming.
Absolutely.
It really is.
Yeah.
If you look at it from all angles, finance, physics, forensics, logistics, human behavior, it just doesn't stand up. It's a fascinating example of a conspiracy theory, but it's definitively fiction.
Could you just quickly recap the absolute killer points, the main reasons it just can't be true?
Sure. 4 main pillars, really. First, financial invalidity. The supposed insurance motive is backwards. Titanic was massively underinsured. Sinking her guaranteed a huge loss, $2.5 million on the hull alone, plus claims lost revenue. Financially disastrous, not profitable.
Right. The motive is impossible.
Second, irrefutable physical evidence. The ships were not identical. Documented differences in decks, A-deck screen, B-deck layout, windows, propellers, even legal tonnage. The wreck clearly shows Titanic's unique features.
They look different. They were built different. Third, forensic certainty. The yard numbers. Olympic 400, Titanic 401. Artifacts from the wreck and, crucially, the propeller itself are stamped 401, undeniable proof. It's Titanic down there.
Her smoking gun number.
And fourth, logistical impossibility. Required a massive silent conspiracy of thousands in plain sight in an impossibly short time. Plus, the fact they cannibalized parts from Titanic to fix Olympic completely contradicts the plot. And the subplots, like the Morgan Fed Reserve thing, are based on fabricated motives.
Okay, so definitively.
The vessel lying 12,500 feet down in the North Atlantic is, without any shadow of a doubt, RMS Titanic, yard number 401. And the fact that the RMS Olympic sailed successfully for 24 years, served heroically in World War I, and was eventually retired and scrapped in 1935. Her entire long history stands as a living rebuttal to the claim she was some useless wreck sunk in 1912.
Her long life proves she wasn't the one that sank.
Exactly. Her career directly disproves the theory.
It really is definitive when you lay it all out, but it makes you wonder, why does this theory persist, despite all the evidence?
That's maybe the most interesting question now, isn't it?
Yeah. I think the swap theory is such a powerful case study in how modern conspiracy thinking works. It really taps into that deep human need to find order or agency or just a story when faced with something as huge and random and awful as the Titanic disaster.
A deliberate plot, even a terrible one, can feel somehow less chaotic, less frightening than just mistakes, arrogance, and hitting an iceberg at the wrong time.
Yeah, it gives it a structure, a villain. And it offers people who believe it that feeling of having secret knowledge, doesn't it? Like, I know the real story the experts missed or are hiding. That's appealing.
Very appealing. The feeling of being smarter than the establishment, of having uncovered a hidden truth.
And now, with the internet, these stories can just spread and persist forever, even when they've been totally debunked, like we've discussed today, using your sources.
Absolutely. They find echo chambers and keep circulating.
So, by taking this one theory apart so carefully, maybe we learn something broader about, the importance of critical thinking.
Yeah.
Looking at the actual evidence, checking sources, especially now when there's so much information and misinformation flying around.
Definitely. Historical literacy, evidence-based analysis. They're crucial skills for navigating a world where, let's face it, compelling fiction often sounds way more interesting than complex facts.
True. Okay, that's our deep dive for today. It really does show how important it is to question narratives, especially those that seem a bit too neat or a bit too sensational when you're faced with something complex. We really took apart this popular theory, using the source material, looking at it from every angle. So here's a thought to leave you with. As you go about your week, think about other truths you might come across, maybe online, maybe in conversation. Could some of them be built on similar shaky ground? Misinterpreted facts, a desire for a hidden story. How could you apply some of the forensic thinking we used today, asking about motive, checking the evidence, thinking about practicality to maybe unravel things for yourself? We always encourage you to keep doing your own deep dives, keep questioning, keep learning. Thank you for joining us and allowing us to guide you on this deep dive.